let's talk a bit about a couple things. Your take. I've read some of it, and I kind of curious about your feedback on the whole solver issue with the winner of the main event and Jordan Griff's opinion about it all. How did you take this all in, and what's your feedback on that? And what happened at the final table?
Yeah, so it was much more minor back in the day, but there was plenty of controversy other years when I was coaching people, giving them hands, screaming out information, watching the stream, passing along whatever I could. That's been going on for a very long time, and I think that's totally part of the game. I think you can't restrict media and people from watching and discussing and talking strategy. So I do think the solvers, as much as I think they're not the most plus CV thing you can do in that scenario, I think they're definitely beneficial to some players, for sure. And, obviously you're playing for a lot of money, and it's very different now without the November 9 than it was, 3, 5, 10 years ago, where you had 3 months to practice all these scenarios and all these stack depths and do all the work. Now the coaches are kind of doing stuff on the fly, and it takes a particular coach to figure out how do I give him enough information in 30 seconds for the next hand is dealt that we can move on from it. And so that's been a challenging thing for me as a coach. I know, Tamayo was lucky to have Dom Nietzsche and Joe McKeon in his corner. Griff, someone in his circle, had floated the idea of me coaching him. And I was trying to make it work, but we didn't really come to terms. It was very quick, and I was busy in other tournaments, so I didn't even necessarily have the free time to help out. But I was going to be available for the shorthanded day, the final day of the final table. But yeah, I think that it's definitely bad optics, but you also need to make sure you're following the rules. And if the rules say no solvers in the tournament area, besides on break or whatever, like, and they had solvers up, I think there should be some type of punishment. You know, I think DQ is too harsh. I think they're I don't know what else they can really do, but I think that something should be done if it was what it was perceived as.
Right. I know you're close with a lot of the WSOP guys and Jack Effel. Have they given any kind of feedback yet of what direction they're going to go to handle this issue in the future?
I really try not to bring up these topics at this time of year because, Jack being the family man he is, he's been away for who knows how many months. I kind of wait until it's more of a downtime and we can see each other, whether it's going to be at World Series Europe or some other stop, or I'm friendly in Vegas. So I kind of try not to have these conversations. I did a couple years ago with the first solver issue. There was someone in LA in a 5K who was using RTA while playing. And that was when the rules were initially changed, where, part of the discussions that I brought up to the staff was saying, hey, this is like a really big optics deal. I don't think it's as big of a procedure issue, but the optics of it are the worst possible. So you really need to get out in front of this. And being the World Series, you lay down the law, TDA will follow, et cetera, et cetera. And, some changes were made in the wording. It's extremely hard to enforce. And I think that's the thing that most of the fans and players don't realize is the average floor person. I mean, I'm a top, successful poker player. I can go buy someone's phone and have no idea what they're looking at if it's a solver, RTA, or something else. So you
Hmm.
expect floor people who are not winning poker players and not, very advanced at poker to know going by someone's phone what they're looking at if it's something that's legal or illegal. I think
Right.
it's so hard to enforce, and that's the one thing that people need to realize is even with it in the rules, very rarely is someone actually going to get punished for it. If they do, it's going to be very egregious, very obvious, and most likely a multiple scenario situation.
Right. That's a great answer. Thank you. I want to ask you what you posted something on Twitter recently. I know Andy Stacks very well. He's a really cool person and great player. He wrote, "I'm genuinely curious. Are there any top tournament players who don't study charts, run sims, and base their play on solvers?" And you said, "Hello." So tell me about. So you don't use solvers at all. Your study
Uh,
habits.
no, I never had a solver on my computer. Don't know how to do a solver. I talked to some kids who use solvers, but the few times I've talked with them, a lot of them come to the same conclusion that with my particular style and how exploitive it is, how player dependent it is, how my image is a big component of it, and my live reads, a solver wouldn't help me too much. And
Mhm.
that's obviously saying because of the tournaments I play. If I was going to Triton and playing against 60-70% of the field being the top no limit players, I would need to have a solver background to at least understand what they're doing, not necessarily to incorporate in my game, but to be able to predict on future streets what they're going to do, and how often I can continue in some spots, because I don't want to always call the turn if they're just it's a spot that they're never giving up on the river. And part of the reason I'm calling the turn is to hope they give up on the river some of the time. So that's kind of would be beneficial to me, but also the amount of hours it would take to study all that stuff for the small amount of EV gain, it's just not worth it for me. And that's kind of been my mentality for a long time. To get to the level that some of these guys are at and girls is, thousands of study hours. And I don't have the time for that. I don't have the need for that. I don't have the enjoyment or the, will to do that for, a few dollars in EV. I just rather, if I'm going to play thousands of hours of poker, I want to find some games I can make some money in instead of studying to make money down the road. So obviously I'm an outlier. Obviously the game will pass me by sooner than people who are not as stubborn as me. But thankfully I have mixed games, and their solvers are a lot less frequent and a lot less popular, and most of the fish don't know how to use them.
I remember, coming across you 15 years ago or more, and you were just the guy putting in all the volume. So, what was your, besides obviously playing any game? I grew up playing golf. I played it a lot more than I practiced it. What was your sort of habits on going back and reviewing your play, your study habits back then that benefited you the most?
I had no study habits. I would, you know,
Just play.
occasionally I would play all hours. Maybe during the once sync breaks came around, I'd post a hand on 2+2 I thought was interesting. Most of them were just self brags about me making this sick read or crazy bluff. But I had a friend circle. Like, we would talk through hands verbally, but it was not. It was more while we were playing. Some of the early Waffle Crush guys. Some of the Turning Stone guys. Had a whole bunch of different crews I grinded with throughout the years in online poker, and that was kind of our study, was study through play. I did everything by trial and error. I played more hands than everyone else those first few years because I was the first massive multi-tabler.
Hmm.
And with the 180 mans, I had so much final table and shorthanded experience that no one else had at that point. And so that kind of worked in my favor at a very young age. And it's kind of cool that some of the hands that I like to bluff with, or that I would kind of do crazy stuff with, now, when you see solver outputs, like, people's like, oh, yeah, you can do it with this. And I was like, cool, I did that 15, 20 years ago. The king, queen offs, the ace five suiteds, some of those silly things, that ace X offsuit. I just recognized the value of those cards and went for it. And it's kind of crazy how many things that people were doing back then ended up being good. Raise a lot of hands, defend the big blind, lead, check raise, all these things. We're just playing poker, and that's kind of, I've always just been a poker player first, and I don't really care if a solver says what I do is terrible or it's not a real size. I'm going to do things to get people uncomfortable and may have to think on the fly, because if it becomes a poker hand of wits and critical thinking, I like my chance. If it's obviously a situation that they've been in 1,000 times, that they're going to do better than me. So I always try to change the dynamic at a poker table in some way, shape, or form, and give them a perception of a different range than they expect, or different sizings, and kind of get into the streets a little bit like the good old days.
Yeah, I love that. So, real quick before I let you go, tell me, give me a bit of a rundown if you had to recap Team Lucky and your evaluation of the WSOP this last summer for you guys.
It was very interesting. Definitely was not the summer that any of us wanted except for Dan. Dan wanted to only go out for a week or two in the beginning and then come back for the main. He had a bunch of stuff to do to get ready for his wedding. I think he was, of the male members of Team Lucky, the only profitable one. Somehow, I believe the women were all profitable in their endeavors, being Rachel, Josh's wife, Sarah, Dan's fiance, my wife, Ashley. So me, Matt, and Josh got pretty brutalized. Josh had 2 seconds. I had a bunch of cashes. I basically was the Alan Kessler of Team Lucky this year, so that one hurts. And me and Alan Kessler both made $1 million in stupid things this year. So yeah. Uh, but no, I mean, listen, I was very happy with my play. I had the most cashes of anyone I think at the World Series this year, and I just didn't have better than a fifth place finish, which is kind of ridiculous at my skill level, volume, a lot of final few tables, and things just didn't go my way, and that's just the random variance. And there's one, if I won one tournament or got a third in something, I would have had a profitable summer. And it's acceptable. I've had so many way above EV years that I could have a year where I lose small, and I'm fine with that. It's not going to affect my life, and I'll be ready to grind as soon as it comes around next year.
So where are people going to see Shaun next? What's next for you this year?
Next is I got a couple weddings on the docket, and then I'm guessing World Series Europe will be my first stop after. I don't know. There's really nothing I'm itching to play. Maybe I'll get online a little bit. I got some other business things I want to work on. So I have a big story that may or may not come out in the next couple weeks about some drama that happened before the series. So lots of always interesting shit going on in my life. Sometimes it's my fault. Sometimes it's other people's fault. So yeah, just we'll see what I have to deal with. But as of right now, poker's not a priority for the next couple months, and it usually isn't outside of the World Series time for me. But occasionally, I'll get bored and go look at a tournament series and go for a week somewhere, and then come back home.
Well, we always enjoy talking with you. Thanks for saying hi and giving us an update on everything.
All right, thanks, Greg.